Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Melinda Plew. I am Director of Advocacy for the ARC of North Carolina, and we are pleased today to offer you this webinar about moving into self-direction. With us today are two presenters, and I'm going to turn the floor over to them, and they can introduce themselves, and we'll get rolling. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Melinda, for the introduction. My name is Leanne Jackson. I've been with the ARC for close to 8 years now, and I've really taken a role helping families learn about self-direction and train families. And I am happy to be here today with Sheila to present on this topic.
Hi, my name is Sheila Sapp, and I am one of the regional directors here in North Carolina. I'm in the Triad region. And I've been working with the self-direction piece for a number of years, and it's a pleasure to be here with Leanne and everyone to share this information with you.
All right. So we're going to get started with talking about the reasons for choosing self-direction. And Melinda is going to start with a poll just to get a sense of who is participating in this meeting, and that way we can gear the training towards our audience. And so a poll should have popped up, and you'll see two questions. Which role best describes you, and how much do you think you know about self-direction? And I do want to say, as we go through this training, there is a lot of information, and the expectation is not that you learn it all or remember it all, but just be familiar with it and have a sense of some of the terminology. So if you do decide later on to pursue this, you have a good base of knowledge. All right, so it looks like based on the poll, we have a mix of family members and professionals. And in terms of knowledge, it's very basic. What is self-direction? And the intention is people want to take charge of some services and want to understand more. All right, that's really helpful. So when most people think about taking on self-direction, it's usually around this desire to have more power, control, and authority over your decisions, and to have more choice in shaping an individual's life. A big part of it is money, so directing dollars. So accessing and determining how you can spend the money that comes from authorized services. And we're going to talk about that a lot more in detail. So you'll often hear the 5 W's. So the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So deciding who will provide what services and how those services will happen for the individual. When you think about taking on a self-directed model, usually the intention is to improve the quality of life for the individual that is receiving the services and improve the quality of supports. And we're going to talk more about the different types of models and how each model allows for this. With self-direction, you do have more authority and more control, but that also has to be considered when you also have more work, responsibility, and accountability. So there's this balance between the two. You have this freedom, but you also have more responsibility. So talking about self-direction, it is rooted in the self-determination movement. This is the why behind why someone would self-direct. So there are 3 main concepts for self-determination. The first is that people have freedom, authority, and supports to make decisions and control their own lives, that these rights are coupled with responsibilities, and these are basic human rights without regard to guardianship. And I think it's important to know that the ARC of US, the strategic framework for the future, really emphasizes this idea of self-determination. And it talks about how people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are the masters of their own lives and destinies, and how friends, families, and others can support them, but it's really up to them to live the life they want. So now that we've sort of talked about some of the theoretical concepts around why self-direction, I really want to dive into the different models. So I like this concept of continuum of control and responsibility. So I like to think of it as a line, an arrow, a dually headed arrow. And on the left side, this is where you have less control, but less responsibility. And this is where provider directed services really falls. In the middle, this is where you see the second model, agency with choice. So you're getting a little bit more responsibility and freedom, but you're also using an agency to help you with the decision-making process. And then finally, all the way on the right, on the right side of the arrow, this is where you have the most control and responsibility, but you also have a lot of work to do to be an employer of record. And we're going to go into these models in a lot more detail as we progress through this training. So when we're talking about self-direction, we are talking about self-directing the innovation waiver services. And this may be a review for a lot of you, and some of you may be getting these services and others may be on the wait list. But I'm just going to briefly touch on what the innovation waiver is. So we know it's a home and community-based service waiver, and that it was created with the intention to help people stay out of facilities and live in the community. It is renewed every 5 years. So the most recent waiver started in July of 2019. And during those 5 years, it can be amended, but it has to go through a process with the CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. Some of the services covered under the innovations waiver include residential supports, employment supports, supports for community activities and day supports, assistive technology, equipment and physical modifications for your home or car, crisis and specialized services, and community navigator. All right, so going back to the models, the very first model we're going to talk about is provider directed services. And currently right now, this is the most common model. And again, this is on that left side of the continuum where you have not a lot of freedom, but you don't have a lot of responsibility. So in this model, you work with the provider, and this provider really decides who is providing the services, when are the services provided, where are the services provided, and how the services are provided. So again, you have very little control. And some of the pitfalls of the provider directed services is that you really don't get a good matchup between staff and individuals. So without this good fit, you have strangers coming into your home, you have a lot of turnover, you have very little opportunity to make choices. And then we think about the long-term consequences for the individuals we support. They really are not maximizing their learning and their growth because they're working with someone who is not familiar to them. And for families, this lack of control can be extremely frustrating. They start to feel like, they're like running a group home and they have people coming in and out. It can be very isolating for the individual, and it ultimately creates more dependence on the system. So despite these negative features of a provider-directed model, this is still the most common model out there. So moving on to the self-directed services, there are two primary models that I would like to discuss. The first is agency with choice, and the second is employer of record. And again, I want to emphasize that only innovation waiver services can be self-directed, and not all services can be, only those listed on the PowerPoint. So community living and supports, community networking, supported employment, supported living, respite, individual goods and services, and natural supports in education. So if a family decides to pursue self-direction, they can decide out of all the services that maybe an individual gets to self-direct one service. You don't necessarily have to self-direct all of the services that someone is authorized for. Another way that you can do it is, say you get maybe like 40 hours of community living and supports. You can decide, I only want to self-direct 20 hours or half of that service. So that's a really nice way to ease into the process. Another important thing to know is that you can go through the training process around either agency of choice or employer of record and decide, this is not for me, this is too much, and it's really easy to transition right back to a provider directed service. Supported living, this is a new service that was recently added to the innovation waiver in the past few years. And it recently is now available to be self-directed. So with supported living, it is offered in 3 different levels. So you can have supported living level 1, 2, and 3, with 1 being the least amount of support and level 3 being the most amount of support. With supported living level 3, they talk about having access to 24/7 staffing, which is written in the service, but some of the issues that families have run into and providers have run into is that there is a $135,000 cap on innovation waiver services. And if you are trying to access 24/7 staffing, that cap doesn't really let you do that. So it's been a bit of an issue, but one of the advantages of supported living is that it allows you to live in your own home. You can choose your support staff. You can choose who you want to live with. You can choose and schedule activities as you see fit. You have more control over money and resources, and it really honors the dignity of risk. So with supported living, like I said, because you're living in your own home, you have to be able to have access to resources to do so. And so one of the missions that the ARC has taken on is really working on the affordable housing piece, because as we know, affordable housing is really hard to come by. So we've been doing a lot of training about how to access subsidized housing, targeted key apartments, or other creative shared living ideas. So when you self-direct supported living, this is where you are maximizing the control in someone's life. And the idea behind it is that paid supports and services should really just fill the gaps in someone's life, not make up the person's life. So supported living really emphasizes relying on natural supports, family and friends to help the individual when needed. And again, I mentioned the idea of coming up with creative living options. So you could have a shared living arrangement where a roommate receives free or reduced rent in exchange for some supports for the person. You could have regular and consistent assistance from family members and friends. A lot of individuals use home or smart technology. And then as of May 1st, NCDHHS has recently changed the rule to expand the waiver limit of 135 for certain individuals who really need that. So I like this statement. It says, at its best, supported living is a team approach centered around the person receiving services, involving the people who love and respect them, carefully orchestrated and hinged on partnership with a common goal to help the person attain the life they desire. Another service that you have access to when you choose a self-direction model is individual goods and services. So this is a service that gives you $2,000 per plan year that helps pay for equipment and supplies that are not covered through another Medicaid source. And again, you have to self-direct one service and you have to take the steps needed to get approval. And so what would happen is the care coordinator completes an ISP update requesting the specific item that you want to get approved. And then once the ISP update is approved, the item is purchased directly through the vendor. In order to be approved, it has to meet the following requirements. So first, it has to address a need or goal in the ISP. It has to decrease the need for other Medicaid services. It has to promote inclusion in the community. It has to increase safety in the home. And then finally, the individual cannot have the funds to purchase the item. So the ARC of North Carolina, when they initially created their choices model, where they're providing innovation waiver services to individuals, it was very much based on the concepts of agency with choice. So how do we partner with individuals and families to help them have more direction with their services and supports? How do we mentor individuals and families to select the staff that they want and recruit them and hire them and train them? So these concepts have always been part of the ARC's history, which I think is pretty amazing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sheila to talk about agency with choice.
Thanks, Leanne. The agency with choice, as Leanne mentioned in the beginning of the process, is the self-direction piece that's in the middle. With agency with choice, the agency with choice provider is the common law employer who is identified by the IRS. If you are a parent or a minor child of a legal guardian of an individual who participates in the waiver, you would be the managing employer in this model. If you do not have a legal guardian or at least 18 years of age, you would be the managing employer in this model. And you would also be able to identify a representative if they're needed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about a representative further on. The managing employer can be the person receiving the services or a family member, and training to provide the managing employer is done through community navigation. And this training is usually approved for 2 months at a time in your ISP update. Some of the things that the agency with choice will do is they will, in working with the families, you will have somebody identified. The background checks will be conducted. Then with that, along comes the meeting with the families where you determine the staff's rate of pay. Also discussing the scheduling, how the employees are going to be paid. The agency with choice will withhold the taxes for the employees and pay the unemployment insurance. The agency with choice will carry the workers' compensation insurance, and they will also discuss with you how to utilize workers' comp in case there is an incident at home with the staff. The agency with choice will file the claims for the services and maintain accounting for the individual funds for the service. The agency with choice would also work with the family in the purchasing of the individual goods and services, helping to get everything in place for the care coordinator to submit the plan. We'll send quarterly reports to the managing employer and the care coordinator. And this report tells the employer how much services have been used, how much of the individual goods and services dollars are left if that's still in there. Most of the time when they do the individual goods and services, the amount of funds given to the budget are specifically for that amount and not just $2,000 to use as you would like. And also the agency with choice will help answer any questions about the report. The agency with choice is required to follow all state and federal rules about waiver funding. If you ask them to change the rules, they are not able to do that. An example is if you as an employer want the agency with choice to hire someone to work with your individual that you have known for many years, you know that the person does not have a criminal record and you're asking the agency with choice to start paying the person before the results of the criminal background check are obtained, can't do this. The agency of choice will not be able to do this because of the waiver rules. Also, your agency of choice provider will produce the records for any audits that are done internally or externally with the MCOs, and is available to answer supervisory and training questions that arise. As we talked about in the beginning, the managing employer partners with the agency with choice to make this happen. So it gets you involved in part of this process. So you, as the managing employer or a managing employer, would participate in training with the support manager, trying to do clinical supervision. You're going to work with the agency with choice to help develop the job description to outline the skills and training for employees. Most jobs descriptions have what is mandatory or need to be in there for Medicaid purposes, but there could be some things that you as a managing employer would want for that specific person that they're going to be working with to meet the needs of that individual. They're going to participate in the development of the ISP or ISP updates, works with the agency with choice to determine starting pay rates. Most agencies have a formula or a calculator that is used to determine what your starting pay could be for an employee. You're going to screen and interview potential candidates to be hired. You know what you're looking for with your family members, so that's very important. And you're going to refer the prospective employee to the agency with choice for hiring and state required trainings. Now, the agency with choice has the final decision on the hiring of the person, but it is a team effort. And you will work with the agency with choice to make sure employees are trained. That's very important. Sometimes we have to get individuals and some little pushes from the managing employers to come in and help push the employees to get started by a certain date. The managing employer will work with the agency with choice and scheduling staff to meet the person's needs and choices. Monitor staff so that they do not exceed the hours authorized by the ISP. And you're going to coordinate to avoid overtime and stay within the budgets. We want to ensure that the timesheets and documentations are submitted on time. And you're going to work with the agency with choice to ensure staff time and documentation match. At times, there could be some concerns that happen with the staff person, and it's very important is you as managing employer relate that to the agency with choice or the designated supervisor from the agency so that together you can work on ways to resolve any issues. Resolving the issues or could even mean replacing of the employee, just depends on what's going on, and good documentation needs to be kept on this at that time. Going to review quarterly reports from the agency with choice and stay within the individual family directed supports budget. It's real important to work with your agency with choice team because you know exactly what your hours are for that week, and we don't want to go over that because we don't want to have any denied billing and make sure that we're staying within the budget. And of course, we want to ensure that the individual is healthy and safe. As to what's included with the innovation service rate, this is a Medicaid service rate that the agency with choice uses to pay for the financial support functions, which is for billing services and paying employees. Any employee training and supplies, there's a lot of training that goes in for incoming staff and maintaining their training on a yearly basis. If, for instance, you need help in trying to identify a staff person and trying to set up employment advertisement, employee pay and benefits, and as I stated earlier, that's going to take care of the taxes, workers' comp, unemployment insurance. Workers' compensation, of course, is mentioned again. It's very important that the member that you understand exactly what needs to happen when there is an incident at work, and it also pays for the qualified professional supervision, the record keeping, and retention. When you're recruiting staff, a lot of families, when they come into this program, they've already identified a staff person that they would like to work with their family. They know them, or they know somebody who knows them. And this is very important because you know this, what type of person you are looking for to come in and work with your family member. You can request that an ad be run by the agency with choice if that's necessary. And the agency with choice will provide an employer handbook suggesting ideas for recruiting. And also your resource advocate trains the managing employer as needed on the recruiting. And that's part of that 2-month training I talked about, that you'll get information about tips and resources, and that covers a lot of ideas about recruiting staff. As I mentioned about the background checks, they are completed by the agency with choice upon referral by the managing employer. The items that they're looking for are the criminal background check. They're going to check the driver's license for driving, sex offender, and the healthcare registry. Now, keep in mind, your agency with choice has to follow the rules, the state rules on this, and they are not able to share the results with you, the managing employer, at all. The agency with choice is the one who does make the final decision on hiring somebody. And if there is something that comes back on the criminal background check, you know, the agency with choice may check with the employer, prospective employer, and try and get a little bit more information. But once again, this cannot be shared with you. Now, if the employee decides they want to share it with the managing employer, that is fine. They can do that. And the agency with choice also has to have reference checks. And a lot of times your families who are doing this will help by doing the reference checks for you. It's just another way of getting them involved in the program. Now, the support coordination agreement, this is completed prior to starting with the agency with choice. It's outlined to have the responsibilities of the agency with choice, and then also the responsibilities of the managing employer. This is a form that really needs to be gone through in detail so that everybody involved understands what their priorities and what their responsibilities are. It outlines processes, established expectations of each party. It's a great form that's in place, and it's one that needs to be reviewed annually to see if there's any changes, or just to make sure that everybody is doing what they need to do. As far as pay rates and benefits for employees, you're going to work together to try to determine this, but the agency with choice has to work on through the budget and make sure that everything is covered and that we're not going over the budget. The benefits will be determined by the agency with choice, and the affordability of the personal budgets and overall agency budgets. As I mentioned earlier, there's a tool that will be utilized, and at that point you'll put all the services in there that are going to be self-directed, and then you will go from there as to what you're wanting to pay each employee. Sometimes the rate's higher than what you want to pay the employee, and that's where you have to work with the agency with choice to determine what you can do with that later on. The managing staff, your agency with choice will provide you with a QP to assist with all the functions that need to happen with this. You will work together to provide and arrange training, to schedule your employees. And it's very important, I think, that the managing employee work with the QP of the agency to do the evaluations of each employee. And they're also there to help you as to replace staff as needed. I mentioned earlier about a representative. A representative is someone who can assist with the managing employer in performing some or all of the duties. A representative would have to go through all the trainings that a managing employer would have to do, but they're there to help in case, you just something's come up and you can't be there, or things need to be approved and you're out of town, but they're there to help you take on the responsibilities of these functions. And the thing is that you have to identify it in the plan. Your care coordinator, once you appoint it, They will have it in the plan that you have a representative identified, and there'll be paperwork that has to be processed for that too, to make that happen. In the support plan, your planning team will need to meet to update the ISP in adding individuals and family-directed supports. During the meeting, the employer and or an individual lead the meeting to the degree that they want. During the meeting, the team will consider the staff qualifications and supervision requirements of staff based on the service definition requirements, and any employer and training team, planning team feel need to be added. Backup staffing plan needs to be reviewed and created and reviewed, and usually they're reviewed on a quarterly basis. You need to consider the emergency plan that needs to be developed. Most agencies will have a formatted plan, and this way you want to be able to capture everything that needs to be in there to help the individual in case there is an emergency. Make sure the plans address how the individual will be involved in the self-directing services. Update the monitoring plan, include the long-range goals and outcomes in the plan, and determine the effective date. Specific skills employees may need. This is going to be different for everybody. The agency of choice will ensure that staff meet the minimum qualifications to provide the service, and the agency with choice in managing employer need to add to the ISP any additional skills they require for staff related to the services they will be providing. This is something that you can work with your community navigator and your resource, and your care coordinator, and this can go in like in the job description, just to kind of enhance anything or any additional training that the staff may need. Next, we're going to go to the employer of record piece, and Leanne is going to take over there.
All right, so just to sort of orient what we've talked about, we've gone through provider directed, which is the most common. Sheila covered agency with choice. And now we're going to move on to employer of record. This is, again, where you have the most freedom, but also the most responsibility. And, you know, for the family members out there, I definitely encourage you, if you know another family or individual that's using this model, definitely reach out and get that firsthand knowledge by talking to them. It is a lot of information, and oftentimes I feel like when care coordinators talk about employer of record, they're still in the learning process too. And they can sometimes present it as this model being very overwhelming. But I'm here to talk to you about how it's possible and some of the benefits, and to hopefully ease maybe some of the anxieties you have about learning about employer of record or even pursuing it. So with employer of record, the individual or legally responsible person is the common law employer. So what that means basically is that they are responsible with the IRS. And you'll hear employer of record, so that refers to either the individual that's receiving innovation waiver services, assuming they're 18 years or older, and they don't have a legal guardian. But if they do have a legal guardian, the legal guardian is technically the employer of record. If you're talking about a minor, so someone under the age of 18, the parent is the employer of record. And then again, like Sheila mentioned, sometimes an individual may appoint a representative. So say that they're their own guardian, but they need help with some of the duties for employer of record. That individual would still be the employer of record, but the representative could be appointed to help with all the duties that's required and all the paperwork. And when I think of employer of record, I think of basically you're starting up your own mini provider agency. That's the best way to think about it. So they hold all the typical responsibilities of a service provider. . 'Cause So again, it is like a family-run business, but there is also a teamwork component involved. So you have your EOR, which we talked about, but also there's the community navigator. So this is the person that's going to help you train on the requirements of EOR. And they're also going to help you throughout the process as issues come up or you run into questions. Typically, the community navigator stays in the plan to assist with some of those items. And then you are required to use a financial support service. So the two primary ones that you'll hear about in North Carolina, and again, this depends on what MCO you work with and what county you live in, but you'll hear GT Independence and Acumen. Those are two examples of financial support agencies. And what they do is they run the background checks, help with payroll, help with taxes and benefits, and they're the ones that do all the billing for services. So thinking about the startup with employer of record, one of the first steps is working with your community navigator to receive the training. And typically the training takes 3 months. And during the course of the training, they will review service rules and requirements, employment rules and requirements, recruiting, hiring, and training staff. And I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of families and offering this training. And it really depends on your needs and how much you like to do on your own versus how much you like to do with support. But I typically try to meet with my families every 2 weeks. And then in between each of those 2 weeks, I usually assign some kind of reading or homework to help them stay on track so that they can finish in the 3-month time period. And then I think it's also important to know that if you need longer than 3 months, that's also possible. You just have to request additional training. And then again, the financial support service, these are the this agency helps with application packets for employees, background checks, and all the initial paperwork for payroll, taxes, and benefits. So I like to think of the financial support service as sort of like the bank. They're the ones that hold all the money. So money from services never goes into the family's hands, which helps reduce some of the liability. Again, it's not optional, it is required if you're doing EOR. And they are also the ones that are filing the claims for services. So the financial support agency will pay your employees and they will process your timesheets, but they are also going to bill the MCO to get reimbursed for any of the services that are provided. And they also have to help with producing records. They're audited as well, and they maintain accounting for revenue versus expenditures in the budget, and they provide that information to the EOR to help them have a good understanding of their budget. So what is all this work that I'm talking about when I say there's a lot of responsibility involved with EOR? So some of the main duties, and we're going to talk about each of these in more detail, but they include ISP development, hiring, managing, and training employees, record keeping, understanding and monitoring the budget, and working as a team, so communicating with the individual's team. So first, to talk about the individual support plan and service delivery. And a lot of families do this already, but you have to be involved in the ISP development process and updates. And it's also really important that you understand all the different services that someone is receiving and how those services can be used. So the EOR will really work to develop a weekly schedule based on the number of authorized hours and ensure that you do not use too many hours or you use each service appropriately. And that's something that your community navigator will help you develop a further understanding of during the training process. So thinking about employees, the EOR is completely responsible for recruiting, interviewing, checking references of potential staff. The financial agency does the background check, but the EOR reviews it and approves the employee. The EOR makes the job offer and helps the individual complete the hiring packet. They help coordinate and document for any training that is required by the employee. And then, one of the harder aspects of being an EOR is disciplining your employees, or it's tough when you have individuals or staff come into your home and they become like your family, but now you're also in this role where you have to supervise and you're their employer. So how do you balance that in terms of making them feel comfortable and making them, feel valued, but also just this understanding that you are supervising them and that you have to meet certain requirements. So really working with that dynamic. Thinking about documentation and record keeping, again, we're using Medicaid dollars. So there are rules that EORs have to follow around documentation. And every EOR gets an annual review or audit conducted by the MCO. And during that process, they're going to review all your documentation and records to ensure that all your guidelines are being met. A lot of my families, they get very intimidated with the idea of an audit or an annual review. And while the idea is scary, I think it's important to understand that in my experience, EORs have never had to do like a payback if something happened. The biggest issue that I've seen is the MCO will point out some issues or errors that are found, and you have to submit what's called a plan of correction, talking about your what steps you're going to take to fix the issues. If you are really not following the rules, then the MCO does have the right to remove you from the employer of record program. But again, in my experience, I haven't witnessed that. More about documentation. The EOR is responsible for developing and revising short-range goals and strategies for the staff to use when working with the individual. They are checking over daily staff documentation, so ensuring that they are completing documentation around all the goals. They are reviewing and approving employee timesheets, documenting supervision on employees. They are maintaining employee files with up-to-date trainings. The EOR helps develop an emergency plan and backup staffing plan. And then they complete incident reports if something does go wrong. And a common question I get when families are thinking about this process is, how much time does all of this take? And my typical answer is, the startup and the learning curve is steep, but once you learn what needs to be done and once you develop an organizational system, and assuming that you have pretty steady staff, the time investment isn't that much, really just checking over the daily documentation. And then you do have some like quarterly requirements every 3 months. And then of course, when the individual's plan rolls around on the yearly mark, there's a little bit more work if you want to revise the goals. But it's very manageable and doable. Thinking about the budget, pay rates and benefits for employees, this is the primary reason that individuals take on EOR. They really want to be able to pay a higher hourly wage. And you can do that. You can do that when you take on the employer of record model. It's important to know that the pay rates are dictated by an individual's personal budget. And it's also determined by the hourly rate set by the MCO for the innovation waiver service. So what happens is your community navigator works with you to understand what services you're approved for, what the reimbursement rate is for each service, and they help you come up with a pay range to determine what the maximum hourly pay rate is for your employees. And a common misconception families have is they look at the budget sheet on the back of their ISP and they say, oh, this individual is authorized for $40,000. But that's not quite how it works. So with the budget, it's set up like a fee for service model. So as you work an hour, you bring that hourly rate in, and then over time that money accrues. So if you have fewer hours, or if you're not using all your hours, then you're not pulling as much money into the budget as that budget sheet reflects in the back of the ISP. And again, this is something that you monitor throughout the plan year to ensure that you are within the budget. And on top of, I meant to mention, on top of the hourly pay rate, EORs can make decisions around, do you want to give your staff mileage, bonuses, sick and vacation time, with the understanding that when you offer some of these other benefits, that hourly pay rate goes down. So what makes an EOR successful? A big part of it is dedication. So you have to have the desire to learn and go through this process, and you have to be able to commit time to it. Organization is really important. So maintaining files and keeping up, with your monthly task, your quarterly task, your yearly task. You have to have good communication, so willingness to work with your community navigator, to work with the financial support agency, to reach out to other families if you have questions, to read the material that's out there. Use of technology also helps. We are, moving into this electronic age, and while I do have some families that still use paper grid sheets for short range goals, all of that is changing, and we could talk about that a little bit more later. And then finally, just being detail oriented. So, part of the audit process is making sure that you put the right hours in the timesheet, and what you put in the timesheet matches what you document on your short range goals, and ensuring that staff don't miss the required training, that they're not, providing a Medicaid service without having first aid or CPR or any of those other Medicaid required trainings. All right, so at this point, we've covered the 3 service models: provider directed, agency with choice, and employer of record. And our hope is that you have a general sense of what some of the biggest differences are between the 3 models. And then also just the ability to identify some of the pros and cons of each model. And why would you pursue agency with choice? Why would you pursue employer of record? And what are some of the barriers to some of these models? So I'm going to turn it over to Sheila to talk about some of the next steps and the process if you are interested in self-direction.
Okay. As we mentioned, there are certain things that you need to do. There are commitments you need to make to do the agency with choice piece. There's a training process that lasts about 2 months. And then if you're going to try and do the EOR process, that's a training that takes about 3 months. So if you're interested, what you need to do is you need to get in contact with your care coordinator to have the introduction training on self-direction. It's a very condensed version of both of the self-direction pieces, and you make a choice as to which one you want to go for, and then you let the care coordinator know, and then she's going to do, or they will do an ISP update to add the training for that short intro. At that point, once the choice is made, then the training will begin with your community navigator regarding the agency with choice or the employer of record model. And then the care coordinator will do the ISP update to change your service providers. There will be an end date for whomever, especially if you're doing EOR, there will be an end date for the services with your service provider on one day, and then to start the self-direction on the next day. Most of the times on these trainings, your service provider and the MCO would like for you to begin these trainings on the 1st of a month. And then therefore you end at the second month or the third month, and then the self-direction begins on the first date of that following month. You're going to begin constant contact with your care coordinator, because if there's some delays, and there have been delays in startup dates due to family emergencies, things do come up, and they do realize that, so that if we have to make a change in the startup date, we need to let the care coordinator know as to what's going on. I'm hoping that this information was helpful to you. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat or anything, or if you have any questions, just let us know. We've just put up a slide here where you can email the ARC of North Carolina, and we will get back with you to answer your questions. And also, we are pulling together a packet that will be sent to all of you attending the training today, so that you can review it and go back. And then, like I said, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email the ARC of North Carolina at the address listed on this slide. And I appreciate your time. I hope you took away something from this training. And if there's no questions in the chat or the Q&A, then the presentation, I think, is done. Leanne, do you have anything else you'd like to add? You're on mute.
Oh, thank you.
We did have one question in the Q&A, and my apologies for not saying at the beginning to throw them in there. So certainly use that email address. But there's one question in the QA. I don't know if Leanne, you or Sheila can take it, but will any of these rules change with Medicaid transformation or managed care?
That question's out there. I'm not sure they totally understand what's going to happen with EORs. I hate to say this, but more to come. I've been asking the same questions as to how Medicaid transformation is going to affect those individuals who are doing employer of record. So we will have your email addresses, and if something comes up that's definite that we can tell you, we will definitely let you know.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila, so much. And I just want to say to anyone watching this that, this is definitely like a very broad overview, but we really just hope that this builds your confidence and desire to learn more about these models. And we are here if you have questions. And, I love talking about this. So please reach out, and we'll definitely be in touch.
I can definitely say for our agency, I can't speak on any other agencies out there, but I know that our team that are dedicated in working with families who are doing EOR, community navigators, they stay pretty busy and are there with the families to help them through this process. During the process, it's not like you complete the training, you start on your own and you won't see us anymore. That's not the case. It's a team, and it takes the team to make it work. It's really neat to see the families to step into this, take off with it, and how they're learning and the experiences that they share, and the positivity of being glad that they did do this is really rewarding. So I hope everyone has a great day. Like I said earlier, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. This concludes today's webinar.